Last week, we stopped on this slide right here, which is democratic theory and practice, and went a little bit about pluralism, the perspective that democracy works because individuals and later, as we'll see, groups have the opportunity and the resources to get involved in government and to try to make a difference, to discuss things with their legislators, to write their legislators, call them to testify during the government process, to protest, to whatever the case may be. Pluralism says democracy is usually a working idea if there's lots of access to the political system and there are the resources necessary to use it. Most of the time in the United States, we think that there is a very pluralist perspective to how democracy works. One of the downsides to it is when too many people, groups with the resources are making too many demands on the system. And that's the second idea here of hyperpluralism, that the system is working so well that people get involved, and so many people get involved that the system stops working so well, and we get political gridlock, and we get debates and arguments and problems that go beyond just policy making and go to the crux of whether democracy is still actually functioning or not. A competing idea to democratic theory from the pluralist and then hyperpluralist perspective is that our system really is not as democratic as we think it is, that it's much more elitist in nature, and that our politics and our government are driven by the ongoing conflict between the haves and the have-nots, between those with wealth and those without. Quite often that is then seen later to be actually a competition between two groups of haves, right? Those that have maybe most of the wealth or the economic power, and then those that maybe don't have the wealth or economic power, but have population, have people, have numbers behind them to be able, so they're still have-nots, but they get power because as a group, they're big enough to compete with the elites. When we see the system operating this way, we tend to think of it and argue that it's not as democratic as it ought to be, and maybe isn't democracy at all, because most of us are kind of either in the middle or not working. Side really seems to work for us, and we disengage and watch the groups battle it out, and that kind of elitism is obviously anathema to democracy over time. It's right; it sucks the life out of it, and is not something that you want. So that was where we left off last week. Keep these ideas, these definitions of democratic theory, right, how they play out in actual participation, right, the pluralism, hyperpluralism, elitism in mind, because when we get to political parties and interests, we'll talk about it again from the perspective of these groups coming in, not necessarily from the perspective of individuals in a democratic system. The next thing I guess that we're going to be moving forward on is talking about political culture. And political culture is, generally speaking, a set of widely shared political values that citizens of a democratic system have. So in the United States, we would be looking at the things that all of us, regardless of our political perspective, think are important ideas or important values that work in our society, work in our culture, work in our government, and define what it means to be a citizen, right, of this political system. So when you look to the United States, you try to look at an overarching set of values that defines who we are. There are five values that are easily identifiable. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is these first five ideas, ones that are fairly common. The first is that we have, regardless of who you talk to, an idea that liberty, right, a sphere of where we live, an arena that we live in, for an individual there should be some sphere that is free of governmental influence. That we as individuals should have an area where we have liberty. We have the ability to control our own lives, kind of make our own decisions, absent from government power or government control, government regulation. And this is a very common idea in the United States, that we exist, our government exists to actually preserve some arena for us as individuals to act outside of government, that we are free from government. And if we just look at what's going on today, right, one of the things that drives a lot of the folks that are having concerns about having to wear a mask and having to circumscribe how many people can get together and having to social distance. Some are, of course, concerned about whether that's the right answer or not for the problem we're having, but a lot are looking at this, at all of these orders, all of these perspectives, all of these demands for action that are coming from county governments, state governments, the federal government, are all actions that are going to limit our liberty. Anytime that the government is extending regulation out and impacting what you can choose to do on your own outside of that regulation, anytime they're extending that, they're limiting how much liberty as an individual you have. And our set of shared values in the United States as to what democracy is for, what our Republican form of government is for, at least there's a large part of it that says it's to preserve liberty for the individual. Now, if you get down into discussions about Texas, we put even more emphasis on the idea of liberty than a lot of other folks do in the United States. But all of us, right, have this idea. Liberty is a foundational idea that informs who we are in this democratic system. The second widely shared value that's part of the US political culture is an idea of egalitarianism, which goes back to that idea that we discussed last week about equality in voting. Egalitarianism is that all of us as citizens have the same political standing in our society, that there's not a level of citizenship, right, and then another level above that or two, right? All of us, from president down to anybody else, regardless of where they serve in government or if they serve in government, we all have the same amount of political standing. Our vote counts the same. Our ability to operate within the system should count the same. Again, this is an argument of what should be the case. So political standing is, right, equality in that political standing is a value that we share. Just because we all share this value, say the value of liberty or the value of egalitarianism, doesn't mean it works for everybody. Doesn't mean that our government and our society delivers on it equally for everybody, right? But we're talking about the set of values that citizens have that they believe that we should be seen in this system, right? That's part of our political culture. And it's part of what we're taught to believe, right? So liberty first, right? Egalitarianism, right? This equal political standing is second. A third large idea that impacts a lot of people is this idea of individualism. We as a society, right, first and foremost look to individuals to exercise control and their own ambitions for themselves. We expect people to be successful on their merits. We expect people to be responsible for their actions, right? So this is a big nod toward the idea of individualism, right? Not everything is the government's job. And the more emphasis on liberty, right, probably the more emphasis you're going to put on egalitarianism and individualism. And those all go hand in hand, because when you say I should be free from government, the reason you want to be free from it is so that you can have control over your own decisions in your own lives, which is the individualism part. And, right, you don't think that anybody else has any higher political standing to stop you from doing that. That's the egalitarian part. So these three things here all kind of tie together, largely based upon the idea that we should be able to get out into the world and make our own way, make our own decisions, and make our own life. The corollary to that is that if you have the liberty and political standing, egalitarianism, to exercise individualism, you're also going to be, if you're consistent, arguing for personal responsibility, right? People should get ahead on their own efforts, which gives them the benefits of their own labor. But if they don't get ahead, they made those decisions themselves, so they're responsible for those failures or less than spectacular results. And it's not necessarily the government's job to fix that, right? And you'll see a lot of this in our society, and a lot of it in Texas, right, that informs how we look at this. Now, we've moved historically back and forth between emphases on individualism and then some other elements that come out later in our society of populism, where we think the government ought to be involved in helping everybody realize their own liberty and individualism. And that's a little difficult to square up, because you got this big idea of liberty being freedom from government, and then this expectation, well, government also might need the help. And those two things, right, don't always really jive well together. So we'll get down to that in a minute. But just because this is our political culture and it's a set of values we widely share, doesn't mean that they're all consistent with one another, right? People, if they're capable of anything, are capable of holding two contrary ideas in their head at the same time, and thinking that they're making sense. So, and all of us do this. So, liberty, freedom from government, egalitarianism, the ability then to see yourself as politically equal and having the same rights and abilities as any other citizen. Individualism, that you should be the one responsible for what you do and get the benefits for what you do. So you get ahead by your own efforts. The fourth thing here, big idea, is an idea of what we call laissez faire, which kind of means to let a thing be. And this is kind of a nod to trying to keep, when we have regulations that we need to make society successful, that we do it at the smallest level possible. If we're going to have to rein in some liberty here, we should do it in the least interrupting fashion that we can, right? We should always make sure that we use the least amount of political power to restrict somebody's individualism or somebody's liberty. So laissez-faire is, we really want to let things go on their own, let people go on their own, do things on their own. When we have to get involved because something egregious is happening, then we want to make the smallest changes necessary, use the least amount of power for the smallest government to address the problem. And that's something that you'll hear quite a bit. If you're paying attention to people today, you'll hear people say that that's not a problem for the federal government to solve, that's something for state governments. Or at the state level, you may hear them say that's something for city governments or county government. And all of those, right, are arguments of trying to bring the decision making down to a lower level, so that it can be more responsive to the problems that are happening at that lower level. Now, the problem, of course, with this is that as you exercise it and say, okay, all you smaller governments solve these problems, some are going to be more successful than others. And the decisions that are made at local levels may not work well jointly with the decisions being made with governments that are closer by. And so we can have some conflict there. And we can have a lot of disconnect as people move between governments and things are handled differently. One of the issues that we're facing with the COVID situation is exactly this idea here that how COVID is spreading within a community or a neighborhood or a county or a state or the country as a whole. Where you decide to engage that might bring different kinds of results, right? If you're working a problem out, a COVID outbreak out in West Texas, your solutions to the problems out in West Texas may be very, very different than your solutions in downtown Houston. What that requires, though, is that other governments higher than that to say, we trust y'all to figure it out. And maybe they will, and maybe they won't. The other, result is that we could have one unified response from the federal level down and say, okay, this is what the federal government's going to telling everybody to do, and that power is there, that ability is there. But when you look at what the values are in our political culture, most of our values are contrary to easily accepting a one solution fits all from the federal government perspective. So maybe, the way we're dealing with COVID is part and parcel of the political culture that we have today, not just who's in power or what information we're working for. All of that matters. I'm not saying who's in power, what information you have, that doesn't matter, but part of it, of this reliance of trying to get things down to smaller levels and have control at those levels is part of this as well. Does that make sense? All right. Last idea here is the idea of populism. And I told you earlier that not all of these values necessarily go together. And populism is the general perspective, and it goes well with laissez faire, that we don't have to all be experts to have a culture that work within a good democracy, that most of us are bright enough, smart enough, paying attention enough, can use our common sense well enough to manage government around us to give us what we need. And we've used populism throughout our United States political history as a way to try to restrict federal government power, to restrict state power, and to justify bringing power closer to the people. Because we say, look, you're an elected person serving in this position. You're not really any smarter or have any better insight than I do. It's just that you have an opportunity to run for office and win. And so your opinion on how things might need to be done is not in and of itself a better opinion than one I might have. My common sense can probably lead me to most of the right decisions without you having to tell me what to do. Historically, I would argue that this is probably, when it developed and became of general practice and perspective and value, was true for most of us, because most of us were amateurs working in all of the elements or areas of society. I really think, though, that in the last 50, 60, 70 years, we've become a very specialized society, and people are becoming experts in very discrete and minute areas. And those people generally have done a lot of research, a lot of work, homework, a lot of debate, a lot of understanding to develop the ideas of how things are going to work, which classifies them generally as experts. Those experts are finding a real hard time in our society today getting listened to, because we have this value that's widely shared among our citizens that all you really need in government to make decent decisions is common sense. And you can see how, right, where we are and where we've come from, those kind of ideas, right, necessarily conflict with one another. Throw into the mix the ability for anyone to become an internet expert on something, and all of this gets to be much more difficult, right? I've got a very good friend who is actually an epidemiologist, right? Somebody that studies how viruses and bacteriological things spread in populations and how you stop it. And he's pulling his hair out watching what we're doing in the United States because he's an expert. And he's like, none of this is how we're supposed to do this. We're supposed to do it, 1, 2, 3. And I keep telling him, dude, democracy doesn't work that way, right? Experts are there, and y'all give your opinion, and hopefully, right, the rest of us consider that opinion useful. But we also tend to think that we've got a pretty good handle on things ourselves. So sometimes, right, we make decisions, and frankly, experts are working right from a set of historical knowledge, trying to use that to extrapolate about what to do in the future. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So it's a difficult situation. Throw a little bit of liberty and individualism in with this populism idea, and you can see people saying, you're not telling me what to do. I got control of my own life. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I got just as much knowledge about it as you do. So I'm not listening to you, expert. Shut up. Or government, shut up. Right? So these sets of values here, right? All of them underlie, in a sense, who we are as Americans. They don't always work together. Sometimes they actively work against each other. These 5 ideas make sense to you? Do you see them in the way you go about life? Do you see other people, right, talking this way and acting this way? You should, if it's right, truly a political culture. Right? It should be kind of the default setting for us in US democracy. Any comments or questions on this? And then in the United States, we get to throw in the mix of political divisions or political perspectives that develop out of that political culture. You've got those 5 big ideas underlying a lot of what we think. You can throw in other things like family perspective, religious perspective, social group perspective, right, that inform who we are, what we believe, and what we think is important. And in the United States, we come up with really 4 identifiable groups of political perspective in the United States. And these are not political parties, right? These are political perspectives. How a group of people organize around it is different than how people describe what they believe and why. And the 4 groups that we consistently see that give us the best perspective on who we are, politically speaking, are the 4 that are on this slide: conservatives, conservatism, right? Liberals, libertarians, and populists. And we're going to talk about all 4 of these and how you can use this to figure out what other people and what you yourself are politically speaking, right? Irrespective of political parties. But what type of political ideology you carry with you. There are generally just 2 types of questions that we need to ask people to start figuring out which of these 4 groups they belong to. And I want to get these questions out in front of you because the topics, the background of these topics, right, is what really driving people to one perspective or another. And so we'll get these out there and then we'll talk about each perspective. The first question is a question about how much you're willing to use government to ensure public order. Now, public order, right, is the order that we have in society that has us operating as a society that lets us go into society, out into the public, and feel relatively safe or not, right? So public order is that government exercise of power that is delivering a perspective of safety for you while you're operating in society. If you ask people how safe do you want society to be, the answer is going to be, well, as safe as possible. And, because everybody wants to live in a nice, safe place, right? But that changes when you say, well, how much government power, force, right, decision making, are you willing to let there be, right, working in our society to deliver that public order? Now you're going to start getting different answers to the question, because when people start saying, well, I would like a safe society, I like public order, but how much do I want the government working on that? How much do I want them trying to ensure that? The more I want public order and then I'm willing to use government, right, exercises to do that, means the more the government's interfering in my life and the less liberty I have and the less, right, individualism that I have. And so when you start saying, right, you start putting the gradations, how much government you're willing to use to deliver public order, you're going to start filtering out into one of these perspectives. The second question is very similar. If you ask people, do you want people in society to be equal? Most people, right, say, sure, right, equality is a good thing. We want people, right, especially if we're talking political equality, to be absolutely equal. All citizens should be equal before the law. But equality means different things to different people. It might not just mean political equality. It might mean economic equality. It might mean access, policy access. If you do equality in society as a result of economic and political competition, then, right, you're starting to think, well, if I am more privileged than that person, and we make this argument there needs to be equality in society, what do I have to give up to bring them up to the level that we're equal? Now, as long as that decision of equality is an individual decision, you can do what you want and no one really cares, right? But the question, of course, here is not just do you want to ensure equality in society, or what kind of equality in society, but how much government are you willing to use to ensure that equality in society? And so, again, now that gets us a whole spectrum of results that we will differ on. The four political perspectives that we have here, conservatives and liberals, right, filter out based on how we answer those two questions. This chart here gives you a two-dimensional representation of where these groups fit in relation to how they answer the question. Where I'm at down here, see if I can right down here, this point is the answer of, I don't want to use government at all for anything, right? If you're down here in this area, right, you're saying, I might love equality, I might love public order, and I want a lot of both of those, but I'm not yet willing to use government to deliver it, right? So this is less government down here, right? Or the willingness to use government less. Any of these three directions you move in is a direction that brings more government into the situation. If I ask you, how much government are you willing to use to ensure public order? And you say, as much as absolutely, public order is the most important thing there is. We'll use government. Well, you are moving down this line here. Right? And so what you can tell from that is that populists and conservatives both are willing to use government, right, to ensure public order. When you talk to the people that will find themselves in these two areas, politically speaking, protection of property, protection of personal safety are some of the primary reasons we have government in their eyes. And so public order, which is protecting those two things, is what motivates them. And they're willing to use a lot more government in that arena than liberals or libertarians are. That doesn't mean that liberals and libertarians don't want public order. They may want it every bit as much as populists and conservatives, but they think we're going to get to it from a different perspective. We're not going to use government to deliver it, maybe. Right? Libertarians, right, are going to political response there might be. A libertarian's going to tell me, less of that, maybe none of that, right? Down here. Populists, conversely, love government, think it's a great tool, want to use it to answer every question necessary, right? Oh, we've got this problem in society. Government can fix that, right? That's a populist response to it, right? Now remember, populists believe that everybody should get involved. Everybody should be playing a part and in delivering this response, and we're going to do it using our common sense. So we should, as a group, be able to deliver an answer that makes sense to everybody. Conservatives can tend to want to use government more often for public order, not necessarily for ensuring liberty, ensuring equality. Liberals are going to want to use it for equality, government to ensure equality, and less to ensure public order. So look at our Black Lives Matter protest and our responses to Black Lives Matter protests in the country right now. Right? If we look at our Black Lives Matter protest, it is an argument that we do not have equality, political equality, public order, the delivery of public order in our society. It's not the same for everybody. We don't deliver it the same, right? And the force that we allow, right, government, police to use to ensure public order, the argument for Black Lives Matter is that it's being used inequitably, right? And the protests are to say this equality is not happening, and it should be happening. We're all citizens. We're all the same before the law. We should be treated by the law and by the government the same way. Now, nobody's arguing that protesting is necessarily a problem, right? When we hear concerns about the protesting, it generally is something that's coming out of a concern for, oh, well, they're starting to destroy property and they're starting to threaten lives and they're starting to impact the economy. Those are all public order concerns. And the responses that we see to Black Lives Matter, if you break them down by the topics that people use, right, they're going to be public order topics. And who are those people going to tend to be more often than not? These people over here that more than an on public order. I think somebody, Mike, you want to talk? I'm getting some feedback is why I was asking. Now, again, I'm not going to go into depth about right sides or wrong sides. That's not the point of the class for us to delve into that. But it is important to understand that your perspective of what the government is for and what values are primary to use the government to protect will help determine what you think is proper use of political power or isn't proper use of political power, right? And I think that what we're seeing right now is definitely, right, an argument between these two ideas. Unfortunately, there's also an element of racism as an issue that brings this in as well, because we believe that a lot of the equality issues stem from our racist background in the United States, our historical perspective, and how we're still working that out in our society, or not working it out, as the case may be. But you're not going to hear that from folks over in this area. They don't see themselves as racist. They see themselves as wanting to keep order in society. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive sometimes, right? So we need to, right, look at this, think about this. I want you, right, to figure out where you fit in this political ideological spectrum. To do that, right, I'm going to jump back over here real quick. Close this and share a screen. Okay. So here in our Blackboard menu, one of the things that you have is a political compass link. The political compass exercise is one that you will go do on your own. You'll go to this website, right? Make sure everybody can see where I'm going. Right, politicalcompass.org. You should be able to see this, yes? Okay. And you're going to take this test right here. And it's going to give you some results. What it is it's a big, long list of questions. We'll jump in and look at it real quick. Probably, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 questions. These are policy-focused questions. These are emotionally focused questions for you to answer about how you feel and about what you believe. Okay? Again, the idea here is you're going to take this quiz, and at the end of the day, when you answer all these questions, you're going to get some results. And those results are going to plot you on a screen that looks like this, but instead of blue arrow, it's going to be a red dot. And that red dot is going to be where your answers place you in this ideological spectrum. Now, I don't care where your answers place you. I'm not interested in that. What I want you to do is answer these questions so that you can know where you are in relation to other things within our society, right? And you can identify yourself. Here are a list of people that at the beginning of the political presidential campaigning season were running for president. Now, obviously, we're down to just two. Trump, way up here, right? And Biden, I'll try to find there, right? And they're in the same quadrant as one another. They're ideologically, based upon how they would have answered these questions. Now, somebody did this for them, right? Based upon policy utterances and perspectives that they have put out in public, and they answered them to be hopefully as accurate as they could be. But they're probably not too far apart. Now, if you listen to the media talk about these two candidates for office, right, there's nothing that they hold in common, right? Um, they're absolutely unique, distinct, completely on opposite end of the spectrums, blah, blah, blah. That's not really true. Most of the folks who get involved in politics have some bit of an authoritarian streak. And if you're going to get elected in the United States, which is a conservative place, you're going to be somewhat on the right. And as you can see, most of our candidates running for office are in this top right quadrant, which is both authoritarian and right leaning. And this is not unique. We can go back, right? Remember, we had this watershed election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and they were opposites, so completely different that how could you couldn't possibly think about voting for the same one. Ideologically, when you look at what they stand for and what they say they want to do, not all that different about how they're willing to use government, right? They're both willing to use government to preserve equality and to preserve public order. They both tend to think government's a good tool to be used. Shock and amazement. Politicians think government is a good tool to be used. Look at all these politicians. Right? We don't have just a whole lot of politicians that say, you know what, maybe government's not the right answer for this. And even when they do, right, they're not too far from the center of the ideological spectrum. So anyway, I want y'all to take this test. I want you'll see this square like this. You'll have a red dot on it. I want you to submit that to me through the political compass, right? You can submit your results there. The way you'll do it is you'll take the quiz, you'll get your results. It'll come up with a red dot. When you have this picture, you can right click on it, save that picture, right? Save it as a JPEG or a PNG file to your computer, to your phone, whatever. And then you can come over here and upload that to the systems, right? So you'll be able to come in here, right? Browse your computer, whatever it is, upload your result and submit it. And if you do that, I'll give you some extra credit points, right? I have not changed my date on this, so this is not your due date. I'll get that fixed. And we'll take a couple weeks. This is not something we have to have done right away. I'll get a due date in there and I'll broadcast that to everybody. But I would like you to go to the political compass, take that, save this picture with your results on it, upload it to me as proof that you did it. I'll give you credit for that. Again, the point of this is not that I care what your results are. The point of this is that you can learn, right, where you are in the ideological spectrum. It might surprise you a little bit where you find yourself. So go do that, right, and find out where you're going to fit. Now, we use the term populist. This is the authoritarian right when you're looking at the political compass results, right? And authoritarian because they want to use government, right? And this is authoritarian left. This is mostly authoritarian. Authoritarian on the left, a little bit of authoritarian on the right, because they're willing to use government for public order here. And your libertarians who are anti-authoritarian, right? Libertarians are like, no government, please. Okay, sorry, we need a little bit, but as little as possible, right? When you talk to libertarians, that's what you get. So the political compass will plot you based on your answers and how strong you answer on each of those questions. And essentially, at the end of the day, we'll say, here's how much you're willing to use government, and overall, this is where you are. Generally speaking, right, I've done this for years with my colleges. Generally speaking, you're going to end up somewhere in this area right here, right? Maybe a lot of times right down in here, maybe a little over here. It's not, right? We seldom get college students, especially if you're of college age, right? Normally, the nominal college age up in this area. The older you are, I'm sorry. Can you see it now? Excellent. The older you are, the more you tend to go toward the right on public order. Um, and you may also go up on inequality, but you'll tend to be more in the authoritarian section, right? The younger you are, usually you're a little more tolerant of the messiness of not using government to help control the society, and that you enjoy the freedom and the individualism a little more. The older you get, the little less adventurous we tend to be, and we tend to migrate as we get older this direction. Um, and so if you were over here as young, you'd be migrating a lot of times this way or this way, right? So where you are today, if you take it 5 years from now, you may end up in a different spot. You take it 20 years from now, you'll almost certainly end up in a different spot. And most of the time, the history is we move toward authoritarianism the older we get because we want more predictability as we get older. And the use of government, right, tends to deliver predictability. It may not be what you want, but it tends to be predictable. So go do that. I'll get you a due date and I'll publish that pretty quickly this afternoon or tonight or something. You're going to have at least 2 weeks to do it, minimum. So rush on it, but the sooner you do it, the sooner you'll be able to start making some sense of the terms that we use as we go forward. Any question about that assignment? Okay. You will use the Blackboard Political Compass link to submit that, to upload the file in Blackboard. It's already there, right? Let me get back over and I'll show it to you, right? So share screen, Chrome tab, here, share. Okay, so when you click on Political Compass, it opens this page here. You click this link to go to the website to take the test. You will right click on the results and save that image. You will come back here and then you will click on the title. The title will open up the submission page, right? And this is where I'll change the due date. And you will come down here and click on Browse Your Computer. You'll browse and find the file that you just saved that has your results, right? You will attach it there, and then you will come down here and click Submit. And that will put it in the system for me. Get back over here. Stop sharing. So hopefully that makes some sense. And close that, sorry. All right. So everybody should be looking at the slides again, right? Okay, I'm not doing horrible on this jumping around bit, but I can get a little smoother as we go forward. Okay, so this is the where you're gonna figure out whether you're a liberal or a conservative or a libertarian, and you'll use that going forward. The rest of these slides are slides that I've put out here mainly for you to read through and understand. These are general definitions, historically correct definitions of different political ideologies. I put these out here as a form of easing my frustration as I heard people use terms in the wrong ways when they refer to people like any Democratic president as a socialist. That's just not anywhere near true. We would have to elect someone like Bernie Sanders as president for that to be anywhere in the vicinity of being a true statement. And that's because most of us, through political argument and through what we see on TV, we use, especially the conservative right, uses the term socialist to mean anything to the left of what I want. And it doesn't necessarily have any accuracy in its meaning. It's just a way of saying that's too much government and I don't like it. Well, it's not. Socialism actually means something. And I got so tired of hearing that, I decided to put these slides of political ideologies definitions in here for you. And when we're accurately talking about socialism, we're talking about a system where the economy of a country or political organization, the economy of that political organization, that country, is controlled by the working class of that society. And working class means, right, all of those folks that are middle class or lower usually, that would be what we would call, right, the general labor force, those folks that work for somebody. Socialism does not in any real sense exist by this definition in the United States, right? We don't have the working class controlling, right, the economy, the means of production, controlling their own livelihood. We don't even, when you stretch it out and expand that to the government controlling the means of production, the government has some places where it gets involved, but very little, right? If you look at our major controlling factors in our economy, the government plays some role in managing that economy, but it doesn't really control the means of production, doesn't control the means of livelihood, right? Our enterprise system in the United States is corporate, right? We have large corporate, multinational corporations that generally, right, form one level of the way we control our economy, and the other is going to be smaller local businesses. Now, the government has regulatory authority in those areas and right, manages some of that, but in no way, form, or fashion are the working class, those people, right, working in those large corporations at the mid to lower levels, or in the smaller business areas, mid to lower levels, controlling those organizations. It's just not what we do here. So to say that we're socialist or that a president in any sense or fashion is socialist is to use the wrong term, right? It's just not, it's not correct. It's just become, right, this political hot button word that you throw out there to paint everybody to the left of you as a bad thing because, right, for 50 years we've fought the idea of communism and its lesser evil brother socialism, in a sense. That's how we categorize the United States. We fight that idea, but we've never actually had anything like it. What we do tend to have in the United States and have had for a long, long time is something more akin to fascism, where we actually organize and its laws and its regulatory authorities based on corporatist perspectives, corporatist values, the corporative system, right? If you've ever had the thought or the feeling, right, that CEOs of major corporations get on the phone and call governments and tell them what they need and what they want, and that the government listens to that, you're describing fascism, not socialism, not anything, right? And it's much more accurate, I think, to look at our federal system and see easily the impact that corporatist perspectives play in developing and implementing political policy. So I think, when we look at the authoritarian nature of federal government and who it's working for most, this is probably a definition that works better for all of us if we pay attention. Now, right now, just like you hear the media throwing a lot of words around of socialism that aren't necessarily accurate, you're also hearing them use the word fascism right now. And they mean more by that than just what I've defined here, right? When we hear them describe President Trump as fascist, what they're doing there is, one, recognizing this corporate perspective, which I think is probably true, right? If we talk to people that voted for Trump, one of the things that helped make them decide to vote for Trump was they wanted government running more like a business. You probably hear that a lot. That would be a corporatist set of perspectives and values. And therefore you vote for a business person to go do that, right? This all kind of ties together. But the other element of it that you are hearing a lot ties to the authoritarian element of fascism. And that's because historically, when we've seen fascism rise in other countries, and our biggest examples of it are Italy and Germany in pre-World War II and early World War II, right? So fascism come to hold both the corporatist perspectives and that authoritarian control from the government. It doesn't have to do that. It can just kind of look at the corporatist perspective of it. And in that sense, when we exclude the authoritarian nature, we probably have extensive fascist history in the United States because we're business oriented, we're corporate oriented. We've wanted our corporations to become national, multinational, and get out and be successful in the world. And we've done things at the political levels, different levels, to help that happen. We don't necessarily have argued for that to be authoritarian in nature, but that's kind of where we are with the term as it's being used today. So just the same way we see misuse of the word socialism, we see quite often an extended and misuse of this word fascism. Move through the rest of these. I'm going to stop after those two. I've got those two up front so we can talk about them. The rest of them, like oligarchy and some of the more that I've put in here, the last three or four, get you moving through. Well, no, I need to cover those. I'll cover these. I won't let you do it. We're going to. So, oligarchy is an interesting kind of perspective. The idea behind it is that a small group of people form a fairly efficient power structure and can government through that structure that they provide, that they build. The organization structure of that small group of people could rest on many different platforms. They could come together as an oligarchy through maybe the business interests that they work through, the wealth that they manage, their distinction within social classes, whether it be royalty or perceived successful family groups, right? It could be military control. Now, we don't have royalty in the United States, and our government and our military has to the very, very large extent, always eschewed being involved in the political side of things. So we don't have to worry usually about coup d'etats and the military taking control of our democracy here. But wealth and family ties we can point to pretty easily, can't we? As how power has been structured and used to gain control of government. I mean, if we look at obviously wealth is the richer you are, the more that you can use that wealth to impact policy decisions, impact politicians, help fund politicians, fund yourself as a politician, right? So wealth fits into a lot of different places for us, and we may have a bit of an oligarch right now, right? If you look at our president, right, one of the elements that helped people decide they wanted to support him was, hey, he's a successful businessman. Look how wealthy he is, right? Which is evidence of success. Maybe he could do something good as president. That doesn't necessarily follow from that, but that's what a lot of people voting for Trump probably hope for. You look at some of the other presidential candidates that were running that have fell out or have fallen out. A lot of them have wealthy backgrounds, right? So wealth has certainly served as a springboard into politics, and then a springboard into power if you're successful with it. One of the nice things, though, if you look historically at the United States and wealth and how it impacts our politics, especially when it comes to folks running for office based off their wealth, is it is no guarantee of success. We have a good number of extremely wealthy folks that have run office and failed to get elected, and we have a good number of folks that were wealthy and ran for office and did get elected. So wealth is, at least in our society, hasn't been a determinant of success, although it certainly doesn't hurt to start off with a lot of dollars backing you. Family ties. We've been kind of migrating this way since the 90s, right? I mean, you get the Bush dynasty, right? In a sense that we refer to family ties, right? You've got two Bushes that were president. We still have Bushes in Texas government that are vying for power. We have Bushes in Florida that are vying for power. So the Bush family is still very much active, right? We had Bill Clinton get elected president, and then his wife Hillary, right, had a lot of political power, ran for president, and almost won. So a little bit of a family setup there. We've got the Kennedys, right, a multi-generational family involved in politics. So this is definitely something we've seen in the United States. Hard to argue that it's actually been successful over the time, as in all of those families have come and gone. As far we're looking at the possibility of another one right now, right, with the Trump family. We've got right Donald Trump, and then three of his children, right, that are actively engaged in politics with him through the family right now. So if we see either Eric or Donald Jr. or Ivanka make a successful political run, you'll start thinking about, is this an oligarchy, right? Is the power structure based on these family ties, or a mixture of the wealth and the family ties, right? So we'll see how that plays out over time. So it's been there. I don't know that it's been a defining issue over time for us. Conservatism and liberalism are two most populist ideologies in the United States, are kind of form the bulwark of the center of our political ideology, and they're both very confused political perspectives. Conservatism, as you see, we get here and we get the much bigger paragraph of trying to describe what conservatism is. It is easily identified as a perspective where we're looking to preserve or conserve traditional ideas, beliefs, and power structures, right? Traditional ideas of who we are as a people, how we should act, where government's role is. And so in that sense, conservatism is always a perspective that is backwards looking and is slow moving forward. I would put it out there as an idea that you don't fix what isn't broken, is a very conservative perspective. And so conservatives are trying to say, look, when were we good? When did we do good things? Let's don't change that as we go forward with government. Let's preserve that. Let's conserve that. Change is not viewed as a good thing from a conservative perspective. It's viewed quite often as necessary, right? Conservatives understand that change is sometimes necessary. And when it is necessary, you have to move to it as slowly and as little as possible, just enough to take care of the problem. Wholesale change is never going to be an argument that a conservative is going to want to hear, just not who they are. And so a large percentage of our population in the United States is conservative in nature, right? They want to maintain what has worked in the past, what has been successful in the past, the institutions that have helped define them. So in that sense, they don't want to change if they don't have to. Liberalism is more focused on the ideas of equality and liberty being merged together in a sense. Liberals want people to be treated the same. Liberals want the government to treat people the same. And generally speaking, liberals want people to have the same opportunities and maybe even the same results given effort in our society. Most of us don't have a problem with that until we start trying to enforce it with government power. The other thing, though, is that the historical picture of liberalism is a very, very broad picture. And I want you to look at this slide here in depth because historically speaking, this definition is very much a definition of who we are as a country. We don't see the media use it this way anymore. We see it use it more in the fashion I told you at the very beginning of pushing for equality in results for people and in our society, equality of opportunity. But when our founding fathers put together, right, the United States political philosophy, it was in its time a liberal philosophy, and its importance, its focus is individual liberty and equal rights. Now, those don't go together, but you're trying to get both of them. So they built this system from a liberal perspective, and they built it on a set of principles that they called liberal principles. An idea that a constitution is an important document for governing how a government is supposed to work and controlling what it's supposed to do. That democracy will be liberal, it will be equal, right, to all the citizens, be open to them, right, all citizens. That our elections, right, spinning out of that constitution and that liberal democracy will be fair and free, right, that all citizens will get to participate in it without coercion, and that the system will not be rigged against them. That there are a set of human rights that we identify as important in our political documents. Liberalism, as defined by our founding fathers, identified capitalism as the economic engine that we would use in our political system. And we would try to encourage free trade so that capitalism could generate as much potential for people as possible. And then finally, they set up this idea of a separation of church and state. Both are important. Both need to have a venue that they can operate in. But they didn't want to see the church and the state become the same entity, right? They needed to be separate from one another. To be a liberal in the United States, as our founding fathers laid it out, meant to support these ideas. And I guarantee you that if I go to a libertarian, or I go to a populist, or I go to a conservative, and I ask them individually about these ideas, do you support the idea of constitutionalism? In other words, that constitutions should provide the basis and structure of how our government should work? I'm going to get a yes, right, from them. If I'm going to go to them and talk about free and fair elections, I'm going to get a yes. Capitalism, free trade, all of these, right, are not ideas that are problematic for the different ideological perspectives. It's just not generally what we tend to think of as liberal anymore. But originally, a citizen of our country was a liberal, all of us. We use the term differently today, but I think it's important that we understand where we came from. Today, I think when you look at the folks that identify themselves as liberals, and what they believe, all of this is still there. They've started putting, though, a much bigger emphasis on liberal democracy and human rights, equality in opportunity and maybe results in society. They view capitalism as good and necessary, but needing regulation. Liberals, generally speaking, are capitalists, but they see it in a much more prescribed fashion than, say, libertarians or conservatives do, which want to see much more free reign capitalism. So I think it's important that you understand this history of this idea and how it comes to us over time. Libertarianism, these are those folks that want to use government as little as possible. They really put their main focus on individual liberty and the ability as an individual to act and be responsible for your own actions with as little bit of government regulation or force used to do that. And so it's a hard group of people to put a definition around, because you can be libertarian and be have a lot of the same expectations that populist liberals or conservatives do. You're just not willing to use government very much as a tool to make it happen. You want to use argumentation and conversion and convince people, but at the end of the day, you want to keep falling back on the idea that it's not government's job to make that happen. And most libertarians have, if you sit down and talk to them, a fairly prescribed area where they're willing to use government power to limit liberty. If you keep going down that road of limiting government's ability to do anything or the use of government as a tool, you'll eventually get to the position of anarchy. And anarchists are simply those folks who say that political power, a political state, a government, is an insult to human nature, is something that is always going to circumscribe liberty, and correct about that. Government's job is to limit, even at the least level, some people's actions, to put regulations in place to limit actions. And so anarchists are like, no, we don't ever want that. We always want people to be able to do what they want to do as they see fit. Makes sense in a pie in the sky kind of what you wish for, what you want. Can't imagine anybody really wanting to live there given what we know about human nature, right? Because the government ain't coming to protect you in this situation. You got to do it yourself. And that's scary, right? Some people think they want to do this. And I think most of those folks that think that way are probably thinking, well, in the society that I'm in today, I would like the government to be a lot less involved